Hello and good afternoon everybody, and welcome back for another video of DIY investing. I was sitting here today and I've taken the time to compile you guys a pretty thorough video. I don't know how long it's going to take. It could have the potential to be a very long one, just so that I can totally explain all of my thoughts and perspectives over this video. I was sitting here today and I was just kind of questioning why exactly can't the average person just see how much value is inside of Bitcoin, and not just how much value is being put into it and invested, but the overall value that Bitcoin holds as a technology, as a payment system, and as all these great things. I was just truly mesmerized and wondering why exactly doesn't the average person see this? And so today we're going to be diving in and I'm going to be sharing with you guys a total explanation as to why I think everybody should own Bitcoin, why I truly believe that Bitcoin will be the payment system used in the future by everybody, and why I think that if you own Bitcoin and invest in it now, you set yourself to be one of the very 1% or top percent of the richest people in the entire world going into this new age. If you're new and just finding this channel, make sure you hit this subscribe button so that you don't miss any more awesome updates like the one provided for you in this video. If you're somebody that's looking to further your education or look at my own personal analysis, click the invitation link in the description of this video, and there you're going to get access to my Discord server. We've got a lot of different things to cover today, so let's jump right into the video. Okay guys, so to start off this video, we're going to be taking a look at rules about Bitcoin everyone should know. These are my most important rules that I feel as if it's really what drives the value inside of crypto, and not only drives the value inside of crypto, but once you start to understand these simple rules, you start to see where this value comes from, why Bitcoin's being used, and how it holds immense potential in the future to come. So let's start by reading this, guys. Rule number 1, Bitcoin is a decentralized electronic cash system. Now, why do I say this? Because there's so many people out there that say Bitcoin is only a store of value. People say that it will never work as a payment system. And so there's this big misconception. And I think that the only reason because of this is because Bitcoin is still so early in its adoption. It's still very underdeveloped. It's pretty slow. You can't really use it that well to go buy and sell your common goods at a store, whether you're buying an apple or, whether you're buying a car, it's a little bit different. But for smaller things, it's really not that efficient. But I point out this rule because Satoshi Nakamoto himself, the creator of Bitcoin, mentions Bitcoin itself, the idea of Bitcoin, in his original white paper. He calls it an electronic cash system, a decentralized electronic cash system. And so that's very, very important, because if the creator of Bitcoin himself has the overall idea and view of Bitcoin being used as an electronic cash system and not just a store of value, I think that that is oftentimes overlooked. And the average person that's watching Bitcoin currently, they view it as only a store of value because you can't really transact it efficiently. I think that that is something that's oftentimes misconstrued and something everybody should pay attention for, the fact that it's not going to be that hard once the Lightning Network gets implemented, that Bitcoin is used as a payment system, just the same as the dollar is. I think that Bitcoin is headed for that as a global currency. Rule number 2, 85% of all Bitcoin have already been mined. So the new Bitcoin that are created and added to the supply, 85% of those have already been created. So out of the 21 million Bitcoin that are going to ever exist, 85% of those have already been added to that supply. So really, guys, the amount of new Bitcoins that are going to be added to the entire supply of the world is only about 15%. So we have such a small amount that is going to continue to get added, which should really show you guys that the scarcity factor is very much in play as we speak. Rule number 3, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin ever, not counting Bitcoins lost already. So what that means is when Satoshi Nakamoto designed and created Bitcoin, he programmed it in a way that there would only ever be a certain amount of Bitcoin in the supply. This number is set at 21 million. So the amount of Bitcoin that are going to be created and added to that supply will only ever hit 21 million. It will be no more than that, and it will be no less. Now, there is a kind of a counterintuitive argument about the no less, because of the fact you got to think that there's already going to be Bitcoin that are lost in that circulating supply forever. People back in the early days that forgot their private keys, people that sent their Bitcoins to missing addresses or addresses that did not exist, those Bitcoins are gone forever. And so in the early days when Bitcoins were worth pennies and you sent thousands of them to a missing address, or you were holding Bitcoins that were worth pennies and you lost the keys to those thousands of Bitcoin that you owned, there is no way that anybody can ever get those back. And so the scarcity inside of Bitcoin is even greater than that. I would not be the least bit surprised to see at least 25% of that already scarce supply now gone because of people and human error. Number 4, owning Bitcoin is like owning stock in the internet itself. So this was something tricky, guys. With the internet back in the 90s and even early 2000s, where we saw the real bubble mania phase with the stocks, what we saw was these internet stocks really take off. And it wasn't the internet itself, because we didn't really have a way to truly value the internet. We didn't have a stock that said, okay, this is the internet, invest in that. And so people made up for that by investing in internet tech stocks. And like Amazon, like Google, all these big internet tech stock companies, they really benefited off of the creation of the internet. And so I think that with Bitcoin itself, we now have a way to value the actual stock of the internet itself. And that's how we're going to use it, is through Bitcoin. By owning Bitcoin, you now own a little bit of the internet itself. So there's 21 million shares of Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin only exists and works through the internet. So the internet and Bitcoin, they can't coexist without one or the other. And so by saying that, guys, there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. If you own a Bitcoin now, it's literally the same as owning a portion of the internet itself. Because I think that we're going to peg the value of the internet to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin survives only through the connection of the internet itself. Rule number 5. Bitcoin is deflationary, which means less are created the longer the Bitcoin survives. The difficulty of creating new Bitcoin also increases the more people that join the network. Nobody can create new Bitcoin without the process of mining and the adjusted mining reward. So this is really what separated Bitcoin from the rest of the pack. And this is actually the reason why I am so passionate about Bitcoin. I told you guys briefly at the start of this video that the reason why I got into cryptocurrency and Bitcoin was because I just dropped out of school. And I was at a point where I realized if I'm actually going to amount to anything in life, since I chose not to go down the average college path, I knew I had to educate myself. Literally, one of the first things I chose to educate myself was on money, the financial systems in America, not only America, but the entire world. After watching a few different documentaries and after stumbling upon Mike Maloney, I ended up coming to the conclusion that there is immense amounts of corruption through the centralized banking entities. Now, the reason why, or the first initial impulse of me wanting to get into cryptocurrency and Bitcoin specifically, was when my friend told me it's a decentralized asset. Nobody owns it. It's not controlled by one government, one entity. It's all spread amongst everybody equally. The second thing that caught my attention was when he said it's deflationary, because I knew the big problem that we have in America currently stands. We have this Federal Reserve Bank that just issues new dollar bills, and it makes the value of the dollar decrease significantly because of inflation. We continuously print more and more of this stuff, and that creates less buying power for the average consumer inside of America. And not only that, but since America is such a strong power in the world, it affects everybody, and that's what people fail to recognize. There is so much more going on than just what you see here living in America, and vice versa. There's so much that goes around in the entire world, and we should pay attention for that. This is the reason why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is deflationary, meaning instead of adding new Bitcoin to the supply by inflating it, there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin, and then every 4 years, the total amount of new Bitcoins added into that circulating supply gets cut in half. And so there are new Bitcoins being created and added to that supply through mining and the mining rewards, but it's only being added with the overall intention of there only being 21 million Bitcoin. So if I wanted new dollars, the Federal Reserve just prints more, and then that just adds to the overall supply. There isn't a set supply with dollars, but there is a set supply with Bitcoin, which drives scarcity. Rule number 6. Every 4 years, the mining reward for miners gets cut in half. Thus far, we have had 2 halvenings, with a third coming May 14th, 2020. So guys, every 4 years, the mining reward gets cut in half. Now, before I jump too far ahead of myself, what is the mining reward? Well, the way that new Bitcoins are created and added to the supply is through miners. And what that means is every 10 minutes you have a new block that gets posted to the ledger, and the miners go at this and they process that transaction. Once the block has been mined, new Bitcoins are given to the miner as a mining reward, and that's how new Bitcoins are added to the supply. At the first of Bitcoin's creation back in 2008 to 2011, there was a mining reward of 50 Bitcoin, meaning if you mined Bitcoin and you processed the blocks of the ledger, every time you process one of those, you would get rewarded 50 Bitcoin. And that was the case up until the 2012 when we had our first halvening, and that cut the mining reward from 50 Bitcoin for every block mined to 25. And then calculate 4 years later from there, I actually bought my first Bitcoin right before the 2016 halvening, and that took Bitcoin's mining reward from 25 to 12.5. And so every 4 years, the new amount of Bitcoins that are being added to that supply gets cut in half. And so it was already scarce to begin with, considering the fact there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. And now every 4 years, the new amount created gets cut in half. Not only for the new amount created into the supply, but the mining reward as a whole. So mining itself becomes more difficult, less profitable, and it really encourages more people to really get involved with it. So it's spread amongst the network even more so than ever before. Rule number 7. In 2012, the mining reward was cut from 50 Bitcoin for every block mined to 25. In 2016, it was cut from 25 to 12.5. May 25th, 2020, we'll see it cut to just 6.25. And so that was briefly what I just explained to you guys. One thing I want to touch up before we go to the next rule would be the fact that the next halvening comes May 25th. I actually think that it comes May 14th. I got my dates wrong in there. So May 14th, 2020, we will have the third halvening. Now, up to this point, after we have a halvening, it really creates a lot of demand inside of the market where prices just continue to skyrocket. And so, guys, this is about 220 days away that we're going to experience our third halvening up to this point. Rule number 8. After each halvening, Bitcoin experiences a supply shock where the price of Bitcoin skyrockets shortly after each halvening. And I'm actually going to show you guys plenty of charts with this video. Guys, remember, this is going to be a long one. I'm going into a lot of analysis and detail with this because I really want not only people that are subscribed to me and have been following me for a while, but people I can show this video that are just barely getting into cryptocurrency. I can direct them to this and they can start to understand exactly what makes Bitcoin so great. And even if I don't fully explain everything to you to where it makes total sense in your head, you can see what I'm typing down on this little Google sheet. You can copy these questions and you can look them up for yourself. This is just a guideline for you guys that might not fully understand the value behind crypto and Bitcoin to start to see that for yourselves. After each halvening, Bitcoin experiences a supply shock. So what this means, guys, is the fact that the mining reward gets cut in half every 4 years. What comes from this is a massive supply shock where demand skyrockets, the price of the asset goes astronomical, and we go into this new paradigm of a bull run. And this has happened after every single halvening up to this point. And we're waiting to see if it's going to happen a third time. If it's worked in times past, there's really no reason to think that it can't happen again. And so by us seeing what's happened in the past, that really helps us to apply what's going on now and maybe predict what's going to happen in the future. And so this really, guys, if it's happened twice already, and each time after these halvenings we have a massive bull run, what's to think that it's not going to happen a third time? Rule number 9, Bitcoin cannot be hacked. There is no way up to this point to hack Bitcoin. The only way to hack Bitcoin itself would be have some quantum computer that could reverse every transaction, every block of transactions that have ever happened in the entire history of Bitcoin. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of blocks would have to be reversed, and then after every transaction was reversed, only then could you start double spending. And so really, guys, as of right now, there's no way to hack Bitcoin. For the foreseeable future down the line, it's most likely not going to happen. And I think that that should be something that we really don't need to worry a whole lot of up to this point. The only real thing that's ever going to be a problem towards Bitcoin and hacking is supercomputers themselves. But I still believe that we're a long ways away before seeing that. All right, guys, the final rule on the list before we wrap up and go into something else. Rule number 10. The only way to stop Bitcoin is to completely shut off the internet. So with that being said, guys, you can't really stop Bitcoin. A government can't say, oh, I hate Bitcoin, let's shut it down. Because the only way to do that is to shut down the internet itself. Bitcoin is decentralized, meaning that anybody that connects to the blockchain and has a server running that connection now has just as much power as the person in Russia or the person in China doing the same exact thing. Everybody has power inside of Bitcoin just by connecting to the blockchain itself. And so the only true way to shut off Bitcoin is to shut off the internet, because as long as the internet exists, people are going to be using Bitcoin. All right, guys, next let's actually jump into some real technical analysis. Let's dive in and take a look at some charts. These are some charts that I've spent a lot of time making you guys today. I really wanted to go over my thoughts and opinions with cryptocurrency and specifically blockchain tech, just because I think that there's so much profound, unrealized potential out there inside of this market, and we're still so early in the scheme of things. Anybody that gets involved now has the opportunity to make immense amounts of wealth, not only for themselves, but maybe even their kids and their grandkids, and potentially even further than that. This is really your last bet to jump in on a skyrocketing asset before everything goes absolutely insane, and you still have the opportunity to accumulate when everything's cheap. Now, what I've done here, each blue line is indicated by the halvenings. Now, these dates aren't 100% exact, but they're within a week that I don't care. So every time one of these blue lines pops up, just understand that this is the halvenings and the way that the halvenings work. Now, from the inception of Bitcoin on exchanges, from the first real trackable info that we have, we went from 5 cents and then peaked at about $33, which was about a 3,330x return on investment. So that was our biggest run up yet. Now, we peaked out at about $32 and then dropped all the way down to $2. And then that's what started our next bull run up. So that next bull run took us from about just barely over $2 all the way upwards of $1,200. And that was an increase of about 500 to 600x. Now, the cool thing about this cycle that we saw from going $2 to $1,200 was the fact that this came during our first ever halvening. So our first halvening was indicated by this blue line. And we can see that we saw this slow little build-up process. And then after the blue line halvening, we went into big price discovery. And so we can see a big explosion that takes place shortly after each halvening. And this is what I mean when I talked about the supply shock in my rules for Bitcoin. Every 4 years, we have a halvening. After that halvening, we have a supply shock, and this drives the value or the price of Bitcoin so high, and it's a big driver in the value of cryptocurrency. And so we see a big rally, we go to 1,200, and then we top out there. And so we have our let's drag this up a little bit, we have our next retrace, and that takes us back down to sub $200 levels. Now from $200, we start our next bull run, and that takes us all the way to just under $20,000. So we had roughly a 100x increase from that time. Now, the cool thing about this, guys, is this comes after our second halvening. I actually bought my first Bitcoin right here at $450 before we broke out and then had our next halvening. And this was really what set the stage before our next big bull run back up. Now, keep in mind, guys, these markets back here, this market cycle looks a lot more parabolic because there was a lot less liquidity inside of Bitcoin at the time. There would have been only a few billion, probably even less than a billion within this cycle. And so this cycle here is when we first started getting our real instance of big money flooding into the market. We almost hit $1 trillion in market cap with Bitcoin at its peak at about 20K. Now, we can see that the second halvening in 2016 takes place right here. And what happens shortly after this halvening? The majority of price expansion happens. And just the same here. We had our first little build-up process, the halvening happens, and then that's what really skyrockets the value of the asset. Same here. Little leg up, halvening happens, and then we get our majority of the bull run. And so guys, this is the way that the cycles work. The only real difference that is taking place is the fact that the law of diminishing returns is very much in effect right now. As you guys have noticed, between the cycle low to the cycle high, the return on investment continuously decreases significantly. We went from 3,336x to 500x, just under 600x, to 100x. And now if we're going by my target, in which I will have scaled out of most all of my Bitcoin positions as far as trading purposes, long-term investment for Bitcoin would still be a hold. But my target in which I want to scale out of all my Bitcoin positions is 200K Bitcoin, which would be roughly about a 64x return. So about half of the bull run that we saw here. Now, something to keep a note, guys, the bull run itself between each cycle is roughly the same size. But the thing about it, guys, is the law of diminishing returns has very much played effect in this market. And so even though the bull runs stay relatively the same size all the way back up, the amount of return on investment that you're going to make is diminishing. But the great thing about this, guys, is the fact that this trend overall shows that we still have a lot of time to go. Now, this blue line here, our last blue line right here, is May 14th, 2020. So right about that time frame is when we're going to have our third halvening. And that's going to take the mining reward from 12.5 Bitcoin for every block mined to 6.25 Bitcoin for every block mined. And guys, based off of our 2 halvenings thus far, every time we have one of these, it sends us into a supply shock where we have an immense bull run. And so I'm watching for roughly the same thing to happen again. The only big difference between this cycle and the other ones that we saw here was the fact that there was a little bit of a lead up time before the halvening, right? We made 2 little leg ups. And now this next leg up that we're seeing from the lows of 3,200 to 14K, it's bigger than the 2 leg ups that we'd experienced previously in the market structure. And it's kind of front running that halvening. We still have a little bit of a ways to go before this next one. And so something we could see potentially is a sell-off back down to this lower trend line. Maybe we do go back down to that 6K floor and consolidate off of this trend line before that sends us into our next cycle. But guys, this is really just my own opinion, my own thought. I have no idea how the market's going to progress. We could start to go and break out of that all-time high mark way before the halvening ever takes place. And so we have a couple different scenarios in which I'm watching out for, but what I want to pay attention, or what I want you guys to watch out for, is the fact that this cycle is still very much just continuously following what's happened previously in price discovery up to this point. And so there's really no reason to be shaken out. The fact that Bitcoin, even if you didn't accumulate at those low bottoms in December lows of about $3,200 and you missed the entire rally to 14K, don't beat yourself up, because we still have so much to go in this cycle. Even if we front run the halvening and we continue to trend up before we ever hit May 2020, it still is going to set you guys up for a profitable cycle, and you can still make a lot of money at it. It just might behave a little bit differently than the last ones. But I wanted to share this with you guys because we generally have roughly the same period of retraces. It's usually close to that 2-year mark. This one would have been shorter, but this cycle really can't apply because it had such less liquidity. But we're starting to see between the last cycle and this cycle roughly the same sort of accumulation. We have 2 years of bear market, followed by a big long period of bull, followed by another 2-year bear market, followed by another big long period of bull markets. And so we're going to watch and see exactly kind of what the market's going to do, how it's going to continue to progress on this linear trend. But I wanted to point out the fact that we still are very young in this. And it's honestly the best opportunity that you can get is coming in this retrace. Because generally speaking, if you're a smart investor and you're trying to limit the risk to the highest potential possible, then what you're going to do is you're going to wait for the trend to change. You're going to wait until we break out, and then we come back down, and you're going to buy that retest. Similar to what happened here. You wouldn't have wanted to necessarily buy all the way back down in here. You don't know how low it's going to go. You wait for confirmation, the breakout of this trend, this downtrend, and then you wait for the retrace to start accumulating. And so this is your best bet for accumulation taking place right now inside of Bitcoin. Whether it goes down a couple $1,000s, honestly, I could care less. I do not care at all by the price of Bitcoin. And the older that I've gotten, the longer that I've been around crypto, I've stopped valuing my assets so much in dollar value, and I look much more on only increasing my Bitcoin value. Because at the end of the day, guys, the dollar itself is going to be worthless. I don't care who you are or what you think. In my own personal opinion, I truly believe that fiat currencies are going to fail, even if they become tokenized. Because at the end of the day, fiat currencies are only ever pegged to the value of the government in which they support. And so the dollar itself is a very strong government, but I do believe the United States government and the hierarchy of the American empire is very close to decaying. And with that, we're going to have a new power structure and a new hierarchy that's going to take place. And so by saying that, if the US government collapses, then the dollar becomes worthless and it won't be used. And so it makes sense to me that as a civilization, we're going towards a digital age. Everything's becoming digital. It would only make sense that our money is digital, because as of right now, even without Bitcoin, most of our money is already digital. Most of the money that you guys use in your bank accounts is already digital. And so why is it so crazy to think that the entire world won't start adopting Bitcoin? Because it honestly will, and there's really no doubt in my mind that that's going to happen. That's why I'm so focused on Bitcoin. I'm extremely passionate behind the idea of Bitcoin, and I want as many people to own as many Bitcoin as possible, because this is honestly the infrastructure, the monetary system of the new age. Everybody will be using Bitcoin in the world, and I think it's a matter of time before it completely gets implemented as an electronic cash system that every single person can use efficiently, effectively, and cost-friendly. But this is really what I had to explain for you guys as far as the Brave new liquid index from Bitcoin. This is the all-time graph of Bitcoin. This shows you the cycles. Each one of these blue lines represents the halving and the supply shock that forms shortly after. It shows you that even though the bull markets are continuously roughly the same size, the law of diminishing returns is very much in play. So even though you weren't one of the early adopters and you weren't able to make all of these crazy returns, even though the returns are diminishing, you guys are still very much early in the big trend of Bitcoin. And we're continuously riding off of this trend line and continuously going higher. And so this is something to pay attention of. This was the chart I had. We're going to continue to dive into even more analysis with this video because it's an important one, guys. It's one that I think is often overlooked, and I'm kind of sick of not having a video that I can resort to people and explain, okay, this is why Bitcoin holds value. This is why I'm bullish on Bitcoin from a technical analysis perspective, as well as just from my own fundamental belief perspective. And so I'm creating this video for you guys so that you can understand exactly why I have so much confidence inside of Bitcoin. So let's jump right in the next chart. Okay guys, so the next chart's gonna take us to the overall Bitcoin as a whole. Now Bitcoin currently speaking, this was the last cycle. Now the last cycle took us from, like I said, sub $200 levels all the way to just under 20K. And that was the last cycle. I had the opportunity to trade that entire one, and so it was a very informative time. But with that being said, after we topped out of 20K, we started our bear cycle. Now the bear market consolidated, long, slow, drawn out until finally we had the end of the bear market. We sold through this 6K support. Guys, think about this. So for you guys that might not understand trading 100%, this part might make a little bit less sense to you, but some of you guys that actually understand technical analysis are going to be able to start to see kind of what I mean. And even for you guys that don't understand TA, you're going to be able to see what I'm explaining and it will make sense, I'm confident. So with the bear market, we consolidated on support on this level, this 6K level, and we bounced off of this once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different times. It doesn't really matter how many times, but what I can say is prices held support on top of this level, this little red line level, for almost a full year, really, before we finally broke through that level and sold lower. Now, the reason why I point this out, guys, is the fact that once we sold through and broke lower, that was the end of the bear market. We didn't go any lower from there. And in fact, we started our next bull cycle back up. So we went from about $3,200 all the way up to just under 14K in one move. And from there, we're kind of just selling off out before we kind of find out where we're going to land on support. Now, why is this important? This is important because even if we decide to go up from where we're at now, even if we start going up and impulsing higher into the cycle, down here shows an immense level of support. Even though we sold through this in the bear market, that's to be expected because the demand is very much in control of the bears. Whereas in this time, the bulls are very much in control. And so it's kind of the opposite. We had this big bull run up, and then we started falling, we landed on the support and fell through it. And now the opposite of that is happening. We made these lows down here, we had this big expansive move, and we broke out of this resistance, and now we're falling back to that as support. So is this one where we hit resistance and fell onto a support and then broke through that. We are now breaking out of that resistance and landing on support. So this is a confirmed support and resistance flip. When this happens, this shows that the trend has changed completely. And I'll come here and show you guys exactly what I mean. We have this little leg up that happens. We have the blow off top. We kind of consolidate here. And then we fall back onto this trending support. Now guys, once we're here on this trending support, we're not going to break through that. I am 100% confident in me saying we are not going to break below this support. And when we fall back onto this, if we even have to go all the way down here again, it shows that the entire trend of Bitcoin's bear market has 100% changed. We went from being in a downtrend, making lower highs and lower lows, to breaking out of this descending resistance and starting the new bull cycle up. And so with this breakout, we're now just waiting to find exactly where that support's going to take us. But the fact that we had this immense amount of support that we bounced off of 12 different times, and now we're coming back down to retest this after a bull break on the upside, that to me is a no-brainer that this trend is very much early on, and this is your last true buying opportunity before all of this stuff breaks all-time highs and goes into the next cycle. Because keep in mind, guys, even if we compare the last cycle, this took almost 2 years of long, slow, downward action, and then, well, this took about a year of retracing, and then about a year of sideways consolidation doing nothing, and then a whole nother year of slow uptrend before we even hit this all-time high mark. So 3 years in between, right? Now, the thing about this, guys, is the fact that from these lows, our first little impulse didn't take us very high in the last cycle. But our next impulse that we're seeing now in the current cycle took us all the way up to here. It would have been. And you can see what I mean if we go back and look at this. From the accumulation lows, we had a massive price expansion. Whereas in the previous cycle, we did not have that. It was a slow period of accumulation before we ever got up to these high levels. Now, the reason I bring this up is because of the fact this shows that there's way more money flooding into cryptocurrency now than there ever has before. We spent less time in accumulation and got a significantly bigger rally than we'd ever experienced thus far. And so in my opinion, there's more money flooding into cryptocurrency. We have proof of institutional exchanges that are opening. We have institutional investors that have openly been talking about accumulating Bitcoin since back in here, even some of them back in here. And so there's so many bullish factors that go into play with Bitcoin's current price action. We broke out of our major downtrend that we'd been in there for almost 2 years, and now we're breaking up on the outside and landing on support. A confirmed support and resistance flip before we start the new cycle high. And so really, guys, this is the last good opportunity that you guys are going to have to buy cheap Bitcoin. Now, keep in mind, guys, we will have retraces further down the future. We will be able to accumulate Bitcoin at maybe a 30 to a 40% retrace at discount values. But in the scheme of things, this is honestly going to be your last opportunity to accumulate below $10,000. The average retail investor has honestly lost their opportunity to own full Bitcoins because most people don't have, $8 grand. Most people don't even have $6 grand to drop on a Bitcoin. So the time frame for the average retail investor to own a full Bitcoin is most already gone up to this point. But with this last retrace, this is your last real buying opportunity before we hit price levels that are just so astronomical that you have the opportunity now to make a significant amount of money. And so I just wanted to point this out, the fact that there is multiple bullish reasons to be buying Bitcoin in this time. Not only that, but before we wrap up this chart, we're going to see something important and why I think that this is honestly your last bet to be accumulating cheap Bitcoin. So as we can see, the entire bull cycle saw these big parabolic runs and then these sharp crashes. And then we hit the trend line and then we do it again. and we just get more and more parabolic all the way up. But the retraces always stayed the same. We always had these little sell-offs. Even though they got more volatile, we had sell-offs all the way up through that cycle. Now, the cool thing about this, and the reason why I point it out, is because generally the retraces are almost the exact same percentage-wise. From the high to the bottom of the retrace is almost always the same. So this one was a 40% correction from the high to the low. This one was a 28% correction from the high to the low. This one was a 37% correction from the high to the low. This one was 30% from the high to the low. And you could technically even count this wick up here, which would bring it to about 33. We had another one right here, about 40% from the high to the low. And then this one, which was about 40% from the high to the low. And then you could also count this one, which would be, 30%, 28%. And so we had multiple of these little leg ups that happened, the entire trend up in Bitcoin's last cycle, and they generally were anywhere from about 28 to 40%. Why is this important, and why exactly am I telling you this? Well, if we apply previous price structure to what's happening now, we're going to see the same thing. From the high of the move to where we're currently sitting, or the bottom of that we saw, was about 43%, right? So we're already at that big correctional phase in which we saw a bounce and the next cycle high on the upside. And so the fact about this, guys, the reason why I'm so excited and why I think that this is honestly your last bet for buying Bitcoin is the fact that we only ever experienced about a 40% correction. That was our biggest correction from the last bull cycle. We're currently sitting from the high to the low that we ever saw, 43%. So we're already bigger than any correction that we've seen up to this point. If we land back on this 6K support, that's going to be over a 50% correction. And so I've been telling you guys, anybody that's been following me and subscribing to my channel, I told you guys that from the very lows that we saw in here, that after this rally, we would experience anywhere from a 30 to a 40% correction. And I told you guys to buy inside of that level, 30 to 40%. And now we're at a point where we're back down below that 40%. And so now is an even better time that you could be buying. I don't care if it goes down 50%. I'm not really counting on it. It's more likely not going to do that. But if it does, that's just setting you guys up for the best buying opportunity you are ever going to get inside of Bitcoin. And I don't care what anybody else says. Somebody's going to tell you that we're about to head for new lows. Bitcoin's dead. That's exactly what they told me back in here. When I bought my first Bitcoin at $450, all the way up, they said Bitcoin can't go any higher, and it did. And so I want you guys to be aware by the fact that this all-time high mark is nothing in the grand scheme of things. This last cycle high, pretend that this is 20K right now. Pretend that this cycle high is 20K. It would have seemed like forever before we ever would have hit that 20K mark again. So many people would have thought that Bitcoin was dead, but let's pretend that this is 20K. This is the new 20K. This is what's about to happen once we break out of 20K. You guys see that? The entirety of Bitcoin's move. And so any of this consolidation below all-time high is just noise. I honestly do not care what happens to it because I'm not looking to take any profits until after we break out of that all-time high mark and start our new bull run, because this 20 high mark is going to look like, nothing. Absolutely nothing when this thing actually goes parabolic. And so I really wanted to talk about this chart specifically to show you guys that this is honestly the last retrace that we're going to see before we start getting to these really high dollar value levels at 17,000 and even that 20K mark. Chances are after this big retrace, we're going to have a pretty explosive move on the upside. We're consolidating and we're accumulating, and smart money is buying right now. And if you're not smart money and you're going to wait until we break out of that all-time high mark, your risk to reward is not going to be that good. And to be honest, you're going to set yourself up for failure by not accumulating down in these low points. Okay guys, now we have another chart. I've talked about this one in times past. This is the gold chart. Why exactly am I bringing this up? Well, because of the fact it looks exactly like Bitcoin. Now, gold in the early days consolidated for like 30 years inside of this market cycle before we sold through support, and then we went into our new cycle high. Now, this consolidation inside of gold is the exact same consolidation that we're seeing inside of Bitcoin. There's very few differences in market structure. We can see that in gold, we had this support level that we bounced off numerous times before we finally sold through. after we sold through, we made our new cycle high and went into our new paradigm, right? Now, if we look at Bitcoin, we're going to see the same thing. We had our cycle high, we fall back down, and then we bounce off of this level a number of different times before we finally sell through again. Now, guys, even when we sold through, market structure looks exactly the same. Even this consolidation is roughly the same. We had 3 lower highs before we made our lower low. 3 lower highs before we made our lower low. And then even the bottom is the same. We had a rounded bottom formation. Bitcoin has a rounded bottom formation. And then we had our breakout, and now we're kind of just consolidating out of that. So the cool thing about this is the fact that gold from these lows just went straight parabolic, and Bitcoin itself is actually giving us more time to accumulate. Currently, as it stands with Bitcoin, we're about like right here at about $500 range for where gold was. And we're kind of just consolidating here. We might drop down a little bit lower, but overall, the big picture trend is still very much intact. And this is what's going to happen inside of Bitcoin. Even though gold and Bitcoin are a little bit different, market cycles show human emotion. And the reason that these things form is through humans trading them. So it only makes sense that these are formed through human emotion. And so even though the technology might be different, or the idea, the human emotion stays exactly the same. And so we're about to see the next big leg up inside of Bitcoin. Same thing that we saw inside of gold back in the early 2000s, turn of the century. And this is what is coming inside of the market. And so you guys, this retrace is your last real bet to buy cheap Bitcoin before the next new cycle leaves you all in the dust. I cannot stress that enough. If you're not somebody that's willing to put your money down now while everything's going down, while everything's fearful, you're not going to be the person that makes all the millions on the upside when we're all taking profits. All you guys that follow me, all the people that have stayed through the length of the bear market, that have sat here and traded, no matter all of the depression, no matter all of the insecurity and the anxiety we might have felt throughout that time, the people that are still here, if you're watching this video, you guys are going to set yourselves up for the most immense profit potential of your entire lives. And I cannot stress that enough. Cryptocurrency and Bitcoin changed my life 100% because I was an early adopter. Even now, even though we're still valued at $8,000 and more, you're still here as an early adopter, and we still have so much more upside to come, and I can't stress that enough. So if you're watching this and you made it through the bear market, or if you're watching this and just finding this and maybe trying to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin, pay attention to the things that I'm talking about, because this is a great opportunity for whoever is watching this to make a significant amount of money. And I promise you guys that maybe two years down the line, 2 years down the line, I'm going to share this video and I'm going to tell you guys, and I'm going to show you guys the prices of Bitcoin, and we're all going to sit here and laugh and be so thankful by how we all knew that Bitcoin was going to perform so well, and we were all accumulating when everybody else was fearful. And then the people watching this video down the line are going to think, wow, I would have had the opportunity to buy Bitcoin way back down there, and it's now worth $100,000 or more. Who knows exactly how high it's going to get? My price targets are 200K, so I'm a little bit more optimistic than most. Okay, guys, I have one more final chart to share with you guys before we wrap up today's video. This isn't going to take a whole lot of time, so this one isn't going to take a ton of time, so let's just jump right into it. Now, this is honestly one of my favorite charts ever. I resort to this one a lot because as a long-term investor, I'm much more, I'm following the emotional psychology of the market much more than anything else. Now, I do play price action. I trade a little bit of Elliott wave theory, but overall, my favorite strategy is market cycle psychology. And this is really the way that it works. Now, if you haven't seen this, chances are if you follow me, you've seen this chart before. But this is the emotional psychology that the average retail investor will feel when investing in the market. Because the average retail investor is the part of the market that loses. Out of the 100% of people that invest in a financial market, only 10% of those will profit. So what that means is 90% of the market is losing at all times. And so this is the emotional psychology of a loser inside of the market. This is the things that they feel. They feel positive emotions when the market is going up, and they feel negative emotions when it's going down, because that's the way that the market works. When in actuality, if you want to actually be a profitable trader inside of the market, you have to be willing to accumulate everybody else's fear. That's the only time to be profitable as a trader. And so this is the chart that I've watched for literally my entire time trading. From the moment I first got into Bitcoin in 2016, this was one of the very first things I started learning when it came to technical analysis, was the emotional psychology. And what followed shortly after that was Elliott wave theory. And then I started learning Fibonacci. I started learning price action. But this was the first thing that this was the first thing that I paid attention for. And I think that this is one of the easier things that new guys that don't understand crypto, don't understand investing, can follow and actually see how it applies to market structure. And so I pull this up because this chart right here is the total market cap for cryptocurrency. This includes every altcoin that ever existed. This includes Bitcoin. Every cryptocurrency that has ever existed is compiled into this one congruent chart, right? Now, the reason why I pull this up is because this chart here follows this chart almost to a T. Keep in mind, guys, cryptocurrency is a little bit more volatile than these typical stock charts, and so it's going to look a little different, but it's roughly the same patterns, and you can see the same market structure. So let's go through here and kind of analyze what we're seeing. So disbelief. This rally will fail like all else. Disbelief is also over here. Disbelief, this is a sucker's rally because it works both ways. Disbelief is really the first little sell-off before we start the big parabolic run. And we're going to see it right here. The first little leg up. This is disbelief. This is where nobody really thinks that anything's going to happen. Yeah, it was a nice little move, but nobody's jumping on that board. So this is disbelief, right? Then we go into the next one, hope. After the breakout of disbelief, we start trending up, and we go into hope, which would be here, hope. And now this starts the big mania phase, right? Optimism, belief, thrill, euphoria. I can see it all. Optimism, belief, thrill, euphoria. And then we start the bear side, and these are the negative emotions. Complacency, first lower high. Now, even though crypto is more volatile, we don't see that same little fall back down. We just see a bubble pop and everything just crashes. It still happens. And so complacency is just a little bit shorter with crypto. Make sure you're exiting and taking profits out of those times. But then we go into the next phase, guys. And really, I don't need to cover all of this. Capitulation and anger are like these two little double bottoms that we see right here. Capitulation, anger, and then we go into depression. So capitulation, anger, depression. Capitulation, anger, depression, right? Roughly the same. It's just a little bit different as far as market structure, but you see the same exact patterns. Even where we bottom was right back down here in disbelief. We bottomed at disbelief. Do you see that? Where depression takes place is where the initial rally started. So the initial rally is right here, hope. And then disbelief is right here. And we bottom right there at disbelief. And that's the way that the cycles work. The symmetry is almost the same. So in theory, if this is depression, then what comes after depression is disbelief. So this one right here, disbelief for the next cycle high would be the same as this, disbelief. See this? After depression, disbelief. We have our first little leg up. This is a sucker's rally. This is where everybody's too scared of the recent bear market that nobody's touching it. Everybody's too scared to touch Bitcoin. Oh, well, I should have bought it at 3,200. Now it's worth $8,000. Yeah, well, you should have bought it at $8,000 because here in a couple months it's going to be worth 100. Not really a couple months, but within the next year I would not be surprised if we hit some of those insane valuations. But guys, this is the exact same thing. The exact same chart, almost to a T. And so in theory, if this is disbelief, this entire move is what's coming. And so the market structure is exactly the same. This is every cryptocurrency. This is counting Bitcoin. This is counting all your favorite altcoins. This is all one chart of all of the data that we have with cryptocurrency. Look how much volume is coming in here. There is more volume with this little leg up that we saw that's not even anywhere close to these all-time high values. There's more value and volume right here than the entire cycle high that we saw back up at the pure euphoria stage where everybody was excited, everybody was hopeful. And now we're seeing about 5 times as much volume right here in this little leg up than we saw the entire cycle high. These are all no-brainer These are all no-brainer explanations for me why I'm 100% a believer in cryptocurrency, why I've been leveraging into this dip harder than I have previously up to this point, why I think everybody should own cryptocurrency and own Bitcoin, and why if you're somebody that refuses to invest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, you are honestly going to miss out on one of the most profitable cycles that you could have ever traded inside of my generation, and not only within my generation, but within the last 20 years even. Bitcoin is going to be bigger than the tech stock bubble that we saw, the internet bubble in the late 90s and early 2000s. This is going to be way, way, way bigger than that, and I can't stress that enough. This is an entire financial revolution that is taking place. Our entire monetary system of not only the United States government, but the entire world, every country is going to be on this revolution. The fact that there is only going to be 21 million Bitcoin ever for 7.5 billion people and counting. If everybody starts using Bitcoin, if everybody starts using cryptocurrency, I can guarantee you that by owning one Bitcoin, you are now part of the richest 1% of the entire world. Now, maybe getting rich isn't your goal, but I know for a fact that I want to accumulate massive amounts of wealth, not only for myself, but my kids and my grandchildren, and so on and so forth. As humans, we want to make it the easiest life to live for our kids. We want to set the stage for a new society. And I think that Bitcoin honestly creates that potential, and we're about to start seeing it happen much more so now than ever before. So make sure that you guys do yourself a favor. Make sure you do your kids a favor, and make sure you do your grandkids a favor and buy Bitcoin today. If you're not going to do it for yourself, you might as well plan for the future of your kids. If you're somebody that's sitting here watching this video and you're skeptical of Bitcoin, why are you so skeptical? Don't you see all of your kids and all of your family using these phones? Don't you already see that all of your monetary system is already functioning electronically? You go swipe a card if you want to buy something. You very rarely use cash anymore. And so why is it so crazy to think that a digital currency can overthrow the entire monetary system? Because that's what's going to happen. And if you own a piece of that, you not only own the entire future of the monetary system, you own a share of the internet itself. And so this is why I'm passionate about cryptocurrency. This is why everybody needs to own Bitcoin. I wanted to go over and talk about these things today. This is a very long video. I can feel myself stuttering towards the end of writing this, just because of the fact that I've been sitting here talking for so long. I haven't even eaten today. Just been making this video for you guys. But honestly, I can't stress this enough. Bitcoin changed my life. I know it changed many people's lives. People I've talked to inside of the cryptocurrency community. This honestly has the power to transform lives in so many different ways. Not just from you being able to invest and make a lot of money, but in the way that average people that have never been able to have access to a bank account can now use Bitcoin and transact with everybody around them. This set the stage for so much adoption in so many different ways. This is going to exponentially increase the value of the world. And not only the value of the world, but it's totally going to allow the average person that maybe doesn't have a big say in the world, it's going to allow them a platform in which they can start actually doing things. Many people around the world in different countries don't have the access to the same technologies that we have. But the thing about Bitcoin is you can still be in a third world country and you can still use Bitcoin. It doesn't matter. And we are creating the infrastructure today for all of that to happen. And I could not be more excited to just be here and experience it all with you. So if you're new and just finding this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more updates like the one in this video. If you want more analysis like the one provided for you here, click the invitation link in the description, and there you're going to get access to my Discord server. Thank you all so much for the support. I will catch you in the next video. As always, peace out.